What's up, Sojourners? My name is Sophia, and I am your host of the Eternal Impact Podcast, where we hope to plant seeds that would be fruitful to your walk with Jesus. Today's episode is called The Man Behind the Suit, and we're just talking about the things that we hide behind so we don't have to show who we truly are. Today, I have my very good friend Adonis with us, joining us. Hey, Adonis.
Hey, what's up?
So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the nitty gritty?
Let's see here. So I work for Jimmy John's. I deliver sandwiches to the masses now,
Yes.
as everyone seems to know already. But let's see what else. I am active at my church home, as you know, Calvary Chapel
Yes.
South. What?
Holla.
And help out with the youth over there. So I love doing ministry over there, pouring into the youth and leading some small groups, even for some of the young men there at the church. So, and just enjoying, spending time building community with other people and pouring in, where I can,
Amen.
and also getting poured in too. So
Yes,
that is a blessing.
exactly. Community
Oh
is so
yes.
important.
Oh yes, I've learned that definitely.
So, can you tell us a little bit about you running in the rat race? What was that like before Jesus?
Oh yes.
How did that affect you as a man and all the things?
All the things. All right. Well, let's see here. So, I grew up in a church. We're going to start there.
Yes.
That was very conservative, and there was a way of having to present yourself almost. And the dress there was always very formal, if you will. So
Suit and tie.
suit and tie, yes.
Oh,
Or
Sunday's best.
oh yes, always. And that was what it was too. And if you were wearing something that was not that, it was
Yeah.
almost looked down upon. Maybe it wasn't always said, but it was conveyed through how people maybe addressed you. So
Wow.
very early on, I had this preconceived notion that, okay, in order to be acceptable, in order to have what is it, like a higher stance, if you will, within even church community, you had to look a certain way. And if you looked a certain way, you were considered acceptable. So that kind of was I think the initial planting of seeds, for me anyway. So when I was growing up in that life, it was very much just always that. So when I ultimately left my home after I graduated from high school, I was always kind of seeking if you will, the finer things in order to be
Yeah, the bougie things.
the bougie things. Yes. So I was very much all about wearing suits and ties in
Oh,
general.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
I owned many suits. I was very much, something secular, How I Met Your Mother. I was super into that show. If you are familiar with that show, one of the main characters was always saying "suit up" and stuff like that. So I was very much a part of that. Of this, like I loved suiting up. I loved
Yes.
like giving that image of like I had it all together, even
Right.
though I did not.
Ooh.
So, and that's what it was, is like, it was a way of perception of like, I felt like people who wore suits and ties and
Yeah.
things like that, like it was a symbol of them having their life together.
Wow.
So when I had moved out and I worked at a lesser job at that time. I worked at Walmart, or so I looked down as a lesser job anyway at that time. I was ultimately seeking something more. I worked at Walmart for maybe about a year and a half, 2 years. And I actually, to that interview, I actually wore a suit and tie.
Oh, yeah,
And I
yeah.
got hired, obviously, but it wasn't the job that I wanted. And I was, again, looking for something more substantial. So about a year and a half after I started at Walmart, I had turned 21 and I had found a job at a credit union. And that was very much like, you got a business card and stuff like that. You got to wear the suit and tie, and you got to look the part ultimately,
Yes.
So I was trying to sell myself in that sense of like,
Yeah.
I had myself all put together. I had the suit and tie. I had these things that portrayed to the world that I, again, had it all together, figured out. And there was even times where people would tell me of like, oh, you're such, a nice looking young man. And so
Yeah.
you're very put together and stuff like that. And inside, though, maybe not initially, but inside down the road, I was just like, oh man, if only you knew. Like,
Yeah.
this is not me. Like, I don't know who I am, honestly.
Right.
And so I was looking at or at that job in particular, because I worked at credit unions for probably about, I want to say at least almost 4.5, maybe 5 years.
Yeah.
And and a lot of that was just me trying to find myself in that job. Like, I ultimately wanted to have an apartment that was my own,
Yeah.
and I got that. I got to the point where I was making enough money where I could live on my own. I had this apartment that was fully furnished. I had all of these things. And I remember actually a specific incident or moment, not incident per se, but where I was sitting in this new apartment and I had just repainted it all. I had gotten it how I wanted it. And I was sitting at the dining room table looking around at all of these things that I had. And I was just like, I still felt empty. And it was still like, I was still feeling unfulfilled. And at this time, I was, again, not pursuing Jesus. I had
Right.
already left church and I had left, everything else behind, because I was just like, I always thought, as long as I'm a productive member of society, like I'm doing a job, I'm working the usual 9 to 5, all of these things, like that makes me a good person, even,
Right.
and
Yeah.
again, put together and
Yeah. And
having it all
especially for
figured.
men, right?
Oh, I think
Like,
so. Yeah.
I'm making money,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
providing, I'm
Right.
doing what I
Exactly.
gotta do.
Exactly. I'm hustling
Yeah.
essentially
Yeah.
too,
Yeah.
and I, I look good kind of a thing, because that's what
Yeah.
I was going for. I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
going for the look of like professional,
Yes.
like, but
Did work consume you?
I wouldn't necessarily say work consumed me. I would say that I was consistently, showing up and trying to constantly sell myself, ultimately sell myself of like to the people that I worked with, as well as the people who were members at the credit union
Yeah.
or who would come through, that I was something,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I wanted people to recognize me as somebody who
Yeah.
was almost even worth knowing. So I would, that was kind of my ultimate goal. Like, I did desire to move up to become like a senior financial service advisor, essentially, which at that credit union in particular, we did loans and things like that. We opened accounts. We did a lot of the things except like mortgages. We had a mortgage department for
Yeah.
that. But as far as everything else, like and again, I had the business card too. So I felt
Yeah.
very like I was like handing this card out. I
You the
was like,
man.
exactly, literally, yeah,
You the man.
like carry it around with me and stuff like that. And it was something that like almost a, again, a portion of that identity,
Yeah.
because it was just like, hey, this is me, here's my card,
Yeah. Where you at a like, if I do this, so you obviously you got your apartment, which was one of the goals.
Yeah.
Did you think that that was gonna bring fulfillment or like anything in your workplace? Did you feel like there were certain areas that brought fulfillment, even if it was an instant gratification?
Just the when there was accolades, of course, like people praising you for, just how you do your job and stuff like that, or even how you present yourself,
Right.
like that's a big deal. So when I was, in that, like I was constantly just always wanting to have that portrayal of me as this, this man who was like secure in who he was, and again had it all figured out ultimately.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
And
that,
that was not the case.
no. Far from it, actually. Far from it.
And so then you made a career switch, a career change.
So yeah, through a series of events, I eventually made a career change. Ultimately, it was not. That was after I came back to the Lord. Ultimately,
Oh.
because the career change didn't necessarily happen until I went on a backpacking trip to Europe. Actually, I had quit my financial service job, not at the credit union, and I just had wanted to travel. So ultimately, I had left it all behind. Because I was trying to figure out again who I was and
And this
things.
is before Jesus.
This was all
Okay.
before Jesus,
Okay.
and so
Yeah.
like this, and I was just like, there's never going to be a good time to do it. So ultimately, I just kind of, I left that
Yeah.
because I was like, okay, I want to go do this before I was 25 at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just like, okay, like I want to just go and do this just
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah.
So I did. And in the midst of all of that, you know, I was trying to find myself, quote unquote, a cliche thing, whatnot, find yourself.
I mean, but
Uh,
we are though,
I mean, we
right?
are. Yeah, we are. It's so true. So I got back from that and I didn't get a job right away because I was still trying to figure out, okay, am I going to choose to follow God? Am I going to choose to pursue other things?
Yeah.
What am I going to do? So ultimately, shortly after I came back from that trip, probably about a month and a half, 2 months later, is when I gave my life to Christ.
Mm.
And pretty much that whole summer, I did not work after I'd gotten back from that trip. And this is 2014 at this point. And I remember there was a point where I had called my old financial credit union that I had worked for, and basically I'd asked them, is it possible to come in to do an interview, basically to kind of like go back to what I knew
Right.
ultimately,
Ooh.
like to find myself in that again.
Yeah.
And I remember I was leaving to go to go interview in Redmond, and I remember I was not even like on the freeway yet, and I just remember just having this sense of like, this is not what you have. This is not what you need to do. Like this is not what is going to happen for you. And so, I remember I pulled over and I called, um, the main office where I was supposed to have the interview, and I spoke to the hiring person, and I was just like, I'm not going to be able to make it today, actually.
Oh
And
wow.
she was just like, do you want to reschedule, or? And I was like, no, I don't actually. And
Wow.
she was just like, okay, well, good luck and stuff like that. And anyway, so I was just like, I didn't know what I was going to do from there. So ultimately, I ended up looking on Craigslist, and I ended up finding a job for Jimmy John's, actually,
Okay.
initially. And so I went over there, kind of interviewed for that, and definitely a totally different job from what I had been doing.
Right.
It was much more chill, and just like, you didn't have to dress up and stuff like that, although I did dress up for the interview,
Yeah.
because I was just used to that,
Yeah.
and I got the job there, and I worked there initially when so I've worked for Jimmy John's at two separate times. So this is the first time I worked there, and ultimately I worked there for like maybe 6 or 7 months, and then I saw a job for a landscaping company in the springtime of 2015, and I was just like, okay, well, this seems like a good idea. Like I was still trying to figure out manhood, I would say, and trying to develop like skills of what I thought a man was. I
Right.
think,
Right. Yeah.
and so I went over to there and I interviewed, and ultimately I was a starting position and things like that, and I was, be considered at the bottom of the totem pole, which is totally fine because I was just like, I don't even know what I'm really doing, honestly. So, but I learned a lot of things from working there at this landscaping place, stuff that actually helped me to, I think, develop a lot more into masculinity, as far as like I was working with other men and stuff
Yeah.
like that, and
Yeah.
doing hard labor work and things. And during that time, I think it brought out a lot of like good leadership qualities in me, because
I love that.
ultimately I started, just as um, a basic worker, essentially, if you will, like,
Yeah.
and then by the time that I left there, I was, I was in line to essentially be a crew leader, to be actually like, running my own truck and stuff like
Oh, yeah,
that,
yeah,
and being in charge. Like I was already, like, I had worked my way up to an assistant, and I was about to be an actual crew leader. And ultimately, that was when I had kind of left to go do something else. But
yeah. Oh, can we pause for just a
yes.
second? Just so that anyone listening can know that your dad passed away, right?
Oh, yes. Yes.
How old were you?
I was 9 years old when that happened.
Okay, so
Yes.
9 years old. Just because you talked about, what you thought manhood was and things like that. So
Yes.
just a little connecting piece for
Yes.
that for our
No, yes.
listeners. But
Yeah.
okay, that's okay. Keep going.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah. Yeah, because that is obviously a big part of it too.
Yeah, it is, and I think that that's cool that you redirected yourself from that, from the line of work at the credit union into now landscaping.
Right.
So you're going to be a crew leader,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah. So basically, in that, so having worked my way up into that position, and at that point, I was having, a lot of struggles internally with, identity ultimately,
right,
in my own walk. And there was a lot of things that I was still trying to walk through with the Lord. And ultimately, prior to like there was a point where I could have either moved up into this crew leader position, but I knew at the same time that God was wanting me to actually do something else, and He opened the door for it. So, and this is totally opposite of even a job at this point. It was basically I went to LA. To go to the Dream Center for the summer, and which originally I was going to be going for a year, but I ended up only being there for the summertime. But God did a lot of work in my own life at that time frame to kind
wow,
of walk me through just understanding who He was to me, and also just building myself on Him versus anything else, any job, any career, even.
yeah,
It was just all solely based on Him
wow.
versus anything
What
else.
is the Dream Center?
Basically, the Dream Center is a place in California for people who have either struggled with drug, alcohol addiction, sexual addiction, a wide variety of topics
Yeah,
that they go into. But basically, it's a place where you can, it's to get in, it's free. And you just need to be approved. But you also, it's almost like you're cut off from the regular world,
yeah.
literally. Like for
Oh,
like there's no
I
phone.
love
You
that.
don't have a phone. You don't have anything. It's just you and God. Like you can make weekly weekly phone calls for like I think it's like a 5 or 10 minute call
Wow.
back home
Yeah.
once a week. And initially, when you first get there, you are basically like in a blackout period, if you will, where for the first 3 weeks or so, you can't talk to anyone
Wow.
other than obviously people that are there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you're just literally like cut off from the main world, and you're they have different like programs and stuff like that there, and lots of journaling, lots of just being in the Word, lots of just
Wow.
like
I love
there's
that.
a church there
Yeah.
that they go to as well. And so literally it was just a time frame for me to kind of refocus
Yeah.
and like truly find who I was in Christ. But yeah, so that's like there's a lot there
Yeah.
ultimately.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So you had to sit with yourself and
Yes.
sit with the Lord
Correct.
and
Yes.
do a lot of digging
Oh
and
yes. Uh-huh.
letting go
Yes.
and hashing out.
Oh yes. Oh
Wow,
yes.
that's beautiful.
Yeah. No, it was.
So how did you know that you were supposed to go there?
So ultimately, I was in the throes of sexual addiction at that point, and I basically I knew I was at a crossroads at this point in my life where it was either I would choose to continue in my addiction, or I would choose to be like, okay, God, like I really want to put my stake in the ground, so to speak,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
give more of myself over to Him and less of myself over to what my flesh wanted.
Right.
And so it was difficult, obviously.
Yeah.
But I basically made that decision, and what led me there was just like I had talked to my roommates. I had talked to just, those that were close in my life, my counselor and things like that. And it was just like, it seems that this is the time that God wants me to
Yeah.
do this. Like,
Yeah.
and I had been looking for, since I had come back to God, honestly, a place where I would just be able to go and just like be kind of away from it all,
Yeah.
for a period of time.
Exactly.
And this program, like I said, was initially for a year. I did not stay for the whole year, but I believe that God really wanted he wanted my yes, I would say. He
Yeah.
wanted my yes, my willingness to go and do it.
Yep.
Because, so going back a little bit to when I had gone to Europe for this backpacking trip, like there was a lot of like back and forth between me and God, even like prior to leaving on the trip, like
Wow.
unbeknownst to a lot of people at that time, because I
Right.
was not even pursuing God.
Right.
But I basically had made a deal with God prior to going on that trip to Europe, and I basically was like, God, if you let me survive this trip, like and make it back, like I'll give my life to you.
Yeah.
The reason why I say if you let me survive this trip is because prior to that I had had an overdose actually, and because I was in the throes of other addictions too before that. Even while working at a credit union doesn't mean you have your life all put together. You can still deal
Even
with
in
the
your suit and tie.
oh yes, you can still have other addictions going on, as we all can probably attest at one point or another.
Exactly. Yeah.
So anyway, I had made that deal with God, went on this trip, and while like halfway through the trip, I remember feeling very strongly that we just needed to come back to the Lord, and like go like in the trip early and come back. And I pretty much I had started to, and I was literally on a plane from Switzerland to Germany, and I was going to go from Germany back to Seattle. And basically, like midway from Switzerland to Germany, like I was so overwhelmed and just feeling so stressed of just like, I was very much worried about what people would say if I was to
Yeah.
come back early from this trip, and to say that I was coming back for God, because I'd never even talked about God. And I was just like, I got too overwhelmed and just too much anxiety from the enemy, I think a lot of it.
Yeah.
And I basically decided, no, I'm not going to go back. Like I'm going to continue. Anyway, but I had felt very strongly that was at that point that God wanted me to do that.
Yeah.
And so when now, fast forward to going to the Dream Center, like I just knew like, okay, like I want to go here because I know that this is what God has for me, and I wanted to be following through with that. And so this is like, honestly, I'm going on a whole other tangent right now, honestly.
Okay.
This is like so outside of what we're talking about.
Maybe this
But
is what we're supposed to be talking about.
I mean, maybe you're right, So basically, so I went to the Dream Center, and while I was there I was there already probably about 3 months or so, and basically God began to tell me that, okay, like he basically had told me, like, I kind of worked through a lot of my stuff already, which, I'd already been kind of in recovery at that point when I went in, what was this? This was 2017. And I'd been already in recovery since 2014, but there was just some like things that I was just holding on to that I needed to let go. And ultimately in those 3 months, like I was really able to process a lot, just being alone with God and just, being able to give things over, and where I was feeling God just saying, okay, now I want you to go back and I want you to start sharing your testimony. And I was just like, no, God,
Right.
no, God, like I'd rather just stay here. I want to just, this is a year program, and like, how am I going to explain to people, like, I've been only gone for like 3 months,
Right,
and
right.
now I'm going to come back, and what are people going to think? And this has always been something that has been an issue for me of
What are people gonna think?
yeah, caring about what other people think.
Yeah.
And ultimately what made me put my stake in the ground and like, okay, like it kind of like in some ways parallels the whole situation when I was in Switzerland, and God was telling me to go back and stuff like that, and just, leave the trip behind and, pursue him fully at that point,
Yeah.
which obviously I, continued on my trip, even though I was I'd made an effort at one point, but decided not against it anyway. But basically God was just like, when you were over in Germany, like, and you wanted to come back, like, and you're worried about what people think, you're more worried about what people think than what I think, so basically,
Exactly.
come back now for me and nobody else, and I was just like, okay, God. But I still didn't do it necessarily right away. I still waited a couple of weeks before I actually made my final decision. And so basically it led me to come back. I came back in early September, and I had left at the like the ending of May, early June. So at that point I was just like, okay, like, here we go.
Yes.
And anyway, so God was just like, it was just crazy to me how he just was like, okay, like he wanted me to come back then and I didn't. And now because I was worried about people. And then I literally was coming back now because of God and God alone. And and even though I didn't want to have to deal with people, what they're going to have to say and stuff like that, and getting back and all of that was just like, I don't even know how I'm going to do this, but God, literally,
Exactly.
So anyway, that's again an off tangent of like not even relating to what we're really talking about.
But it is though, because you're being obedient to God, right? You're now in a place where you left your job, you went to the Dream Center, and and what a process it was for you to submit to God, but also to not care about what people think.
No, yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah. And that's been the hardest part,
That is, especially when you're used to being in your suit and tie and having your name on your cards and being somebody to now like, ooh, Adonis didn't even finish that program.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I look at it as almost a defining feature of just like, oh, like, he doesn't finish things, or he didn't finish something,
Yeah.
And, and even people from the Dream Center at that time, when I was talking to them, I was just like, I feel like this is what God wants me to do. I know like this program is a year, but I'm feeling like this is what God would have me to do next. And they're like, well, God's a God of finishing kind of a thing, so they were throwing that in my face, and I was just like, well, I don't know. Like, I mean, like anyone can finish a program though, but that doesn't mean that that's going to save them either, you know?
Exactly.
Like just because you follow through with it doesn't mean, you're going to like stay on the right path ultimately. And something that I also realized too was just like, as what God had said to me, but when I was still in the midst of making my decision, like you can choose to still stay here. Like that's fine. But you went here because of me, but I'm telling you to leave. And now you're choosing to stay here because of you and what you want.
Because of your pride.
Exactly, because of my pride.
You don't want people
exactly.
to speak on
your
name.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah,
So it was just like, and so I was just like, okay, God, like, so basically it was almost like an ultimatum essentially of just like, okay, like you can stay here. It's your choice, but you're not doing it for me anymore. You're doing it for yourself.
And that takes such humility.
Oh yeah, it was definitely very humbling.
Breaking you down to, right?
Oh yes, I would say so, because it was definitely very humbling, because I really didn't want to do it, like, and sharing my testimony was the last thing that I was ever planning to do as well too, because it was definitely not something that I was thrilled to be sharing in the first place, or having to have gone through anyway. So yeah.
So I mean, I just think that that's huge that you went from the credit unions in your suit and ties and portraying this image, and then God pulling you out of that, and then pulling you out of that, like he knew you were going to be on this trip. So you went on the trip because you're like, it's now or never.
Yes.
But ultimately, God used that trip, kind of just like making his way into you're searching, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
You're searching. You go on that trip. God's calling you back. Make an attempt, but you stay.
Yeah.
But then God, faithful, continues to go into your heart. Then you go into landscaping. Total. That takes humility also. Yeah. Don't you think?
Oh yeah, no, definitely.
Going from credit union.
Yeah, right.
I just love this. I just like because you don't see it until you look back,
Right.
right?
No, yeah.
Like now, like, so you went from credit union polish to
Yeah.
dirty landscaper.
Oh, yeah. No, definitely.
Like,
Yeah.
you know, picking up other people's leaves
Yeah.
and
Oh,
cutting
yes.
their grass
Oh, yeah.
and things like that.
Uh-huh.
And still like searching ish, right?
Yeah.
We're
Oh, no,
picking up
definitely.
different tools and skills and
Yeah.
manhood and things like that.
Yeah.
But then to humble you even more, go to the Dream Center.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
Yeah, and then
to humble you even more.
Yeah, right. Tell
Come
me about
on.
it. Yeah, no, really
because
though. Yeah.
that is the issue
No,
here.
it is. Yeah,
you
pride.
want to be at the credit union with the suit and tie.
Oh, yeah, I know. Of
Looking
course.
a certain way.
Of course,
and
portraying to the world.
Being able to act a certain way because you're in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then just that gradual breaking down.
Yep. Uh-huh.
And then now he's like, okay, now you've left that place and you're going to go and share your testimony.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, that's like...
It's an adventure, obviously.
It is. It is. And in each of these places, God just dealing with your heart in each of them.
Yeah.
But the hardest place to deal with it was in the credit union, you think? Because
Yeah.
of how you were able to
Oh, yeah.
act and be and look.
Oh, yeah. Well, back then I had like 7 suits and multiple dress shirts, ties, everything, like nice shoes. Like literally, I was about it all. Like from head to toe, I was like, you know, like looked like I had it all together. Very polished, as you're saying here. So, yes.
So in this rat race, it's easy for us to hide our brokenness.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
In our workplaces. To hide our brokenness, to put on a facade. To put on a face, to look polished, but on the inside just be completely wreck. And we all are.
Oh, yeah. No,
and
definitely.
we all are.
Oh, yeah.
But
regardless of what job we do.
Exactly. But our encouragement to the people is don't let that be you.
Yeah.
You don't have to be that way because God sees all.
No,
and
yeah.
He knows all.
Agreed.
Be obedient.
Yeah.
If you're thinking you want a trip to Europe, a backpacking trip to Europe, ask yourself, what are you really looking for?
Well, you know, I was looking for adventure, honestly. So ultimately, he did give me adventure.
Yeah,
so
yes, and there is no other adventure than the one with Jesus.
No, it's so true. I agree.
Like it is not boring.
No, it has
is
not
risky.
been. No. Oh yeah.
It is the other way.
Knockout, drag out.
Yeah, you're swimming upstream. Like we're set apart. Like
oh yeah,
becoming a Christian is not. It's not easy.
No, definitely not.
It's not easy, but it is fulfilling.
Yeah.
And
it is.
And you start to become whole because of Jesus.
Amen.
And He heals your brokenness and your
Thank
wounds.
God for that.
Yes. And all the other things we hide under suit and ties and dresses
Oh,
and
yeah.
heels.
Oh yeah.
He does the work in us. So
Amen to that.
wow. Do you have any other, I don't know, encouragement for being lost in the rat race? What would be your encouragement?
Encouragement if you're lost in it, like, I mean, seek God, obviously, you know,
Yeah.
like, I mean,
say yes.
Yeah, say yes. Yeah. Say yes, ultimately. Yeah. Because I mean, you got to say yes to God because it's, you know, that is the most fulfillment I've found is saying yes to God, even though it's been crazy. It's been a journey, as cliche as that sounds. And I'm a walking cliche these days, it seems, but that's fine. Walking cliche for Jesus.
Exactly.
But yeah, no, like say yes for sure. Like that would definitely be the main thing is just, you know, because he's got you. He's got it all figured out more than you do. That's for sure. Like,
definitely.
And if you're trying to figure it out in your own power, like, oh man, like I remember when I was trying to do it in my own power and like it was a mess. Yeah, it's a circles mess, like everything.
Circles around that mess.
Oh, yeah. Definitely, yeah. Trying to find ways around everything and like, no, it was exhausting. So yeah.
So say yes, and even when it feels opposite, it's usually when it feels opposite from what you want.
Oh yeah, no, exactly, yeah, that's so true.
When you feel God calling you in a different direction, go.
Yeah.
Go and do.
Yes.
And one thing that I love is that the Dream Center was a part of His plan. You acknowledge that, you know that, but also leaving it early was a part of His plan.
Right. Yeah.
You know, because I feel like people can get into that place and say, did I hear him right?
Yeah.
Did I mess up? Did I quit too early? Did
Yeah.
I,
No,
all these
exactly. Oh,
things?
yeah. And I've asked that question even now,
Right.
at certain
But
points.
God knows.
Mm-hmm.
And so just being obedient with the next
Right.
step,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing where God leads and guides. And
Yeah.
you've shared your testimony in so many places.
Yes.
And he'll share his testimony here too eventually.
Yeah.
But today we're just talking about the rat race.
Yes.
So thank you for tuning in.
Yes. Thank you.
And the encouragement is say yes to God even when it feels hard
Yeah.
or you don't want to humble yourself.
Yes.
All right.
Agreed.
Yes.
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 Yes.